There we go. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to all of you. Please do take your seats, and a warm welcome also to our online audience. We have colleagues online joining us through Zoom, so this is a very wonderful hybrid event. Today here at COP27 on 14 November, we are going to talk about an incredibly important topic, energy. Energy means life. Today we're talking about energy security, energy independence, but also sustainability with renewables rolling out locally. For people who do not have a headset, please get a headset. Then you can hear us speak as well. And it will be on channel 4. My name is Marijke van Staden. I am South African. I work for ICLEI based in Bonn in Germany, where I lead our climate work, our research work, and our access to finance activities. And all of this you will hear more about today. And we have a wonderful lineup of panelists. But before we move to our speakers, let's introduce Rohit Sen, the head of sustainable energy at ICLEI, who will set the scene for us today so that we can get started. Rohit, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Marijke. Thanks a lot. Good day to you all. And before we go on discussing about energy security, independence, and sustainability, let's take a step back and set the scene and look where we are. Yeah. Can we have the next slide, please? Oh, it's already there. So why are we here? I mean, it's very obvious that the GHG emissions have skyrocketed and the impacts are already visible to all of us. I say time to act was yesterday, but today is the time for the next best alternative. Next, please. The global perspectives is very much clear in front of us. The climate change impacts will not hit everyone equally. It hits most the vulnerable and the people who are from the poor countries, especially the ones whose GHG footprint are the least. Next, please. We are already seeing drought, floods, wildfire, famine, war, etc. in various parts of the world. It is something that is crippling us from the sustainable energy transition action that we need to do. Next, please. The vulnerabilities are intersectional. It is, as I said, hitting people, societies, and systems regardless of gender, race, age, and disability. Next, please. What we have seen today is that energy is at the heart of it. No matter what commodity, no matter what sector that you talk about, energy insecurity, that is the lack, affordability, or availability, ripples across and compounds existing crises and makes recovery difficult. Say food security, say, for example, inflation, and so on. So in a nutshell, next, please. This is what we see. We are on a hot pressure, inside a hot pressure cooker, which is impacting on extreme weather, inflation, war, inequality, and supply of disruptions. So next, please. We need to act. What we can do. Next, please. We have been talking about cities, regions being at the front line and being the actors who can lead this transition bottom up. But we all know this fact. So what exactly we need to do? Who is the person that we need to shake up, wake up, that this transition can be made bottom up? Top down, time has run out. We can't make, the funds, the change reach everyone. So the question here then to all the panelists would be, how can we do this? Next, please. And also coordinate the action at the local level with multi-level action with not only with the local and regional governments, but also include the local level stakeholders, including private sector, NGOs, CSOs, and everyone. Next, please. ICLEI is working a lot with the various cities and regions and local stakeholders in various forms at the international level, at the national level, and the local and regional level through various projects like the 100% renewables, the sustainable energy solutions for Africa, where we are looking at the transition as well as innovative solutions and so on, and through many other initiatives. But this is not enough. We need to do more. We need to do more at ICLEI as well as with you all, with partnerships. So what exactly can we do to further have rapid action on ground? Next, please. The question that I leave you, Marijke, and the panelists with is how do we channel these experiences and concerns into amplified, I wanted to underline that, amplified action on the ground. Next, please. And I leave you for a fruitful discussion. Hopefully, I can take back home something that I can implement in my projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. As you can hear, we are very passionate about energy and specifically sustainable energy at ICLEI. And we've invited some of our partners to share with you their perspectives, talking about the urgency for action, how we can interconnect climate change mitigation, enhanced resilience, but also enhanced energy security, and making sure that there's access for energy for all. Now, I have 5 very, very diverse panelists here today. So first of all, thank you for joining me. And I will briefly introduce them all, and then I will start some engagement with you. Let's start with the ladies. Rana Adib, the Executive Director of REN21. We have known each other for many decades, and we've had fun on these kinds of panels, but the time for fun is over. I would like to hear your thoughts on that a little bit later. And then let's move to my colleague here next to me. From Kisumu County, Kenya, we have Mr. Joseph Oganga, the Chief Officer for the Department of Energy and Industrialization. A warm welcome to you, sir. Next to him, we have Mr. Kunye Kamyale Chao, or Kem, we'll call you briefly, Executive Director of the International Climate Development Institute from Chinese Taipei. A warm welcome, sir. Then we have next to him, Alexandre Sion, the founding partner of Sion Avogados, a legal expert. He's also on the board of ICLEI South America. And we would like to ask you some tricky questions on the legal side of things. And then last but not least, our youth representative, and we're very happy to have you with us. Energy is for all, but definitely the youth's perspectives and voice is needed. And we are keen to hear your perspective. Mr. Vaughan Javier Gamer, Senior Chapter Associate from Student Energy. So without much ado, energy is life, and we are facing the strangest space we've ever faced globally, with wars, with water scarcity, biodiversity crisis, a climate emergency, many other emergencies. It is very difficult to understand what to do. However, I think we have a recipe of success in our collective form. And I would like to ask, maybe let's start with you, Kim. Where does the balance lie between the short-term incentives that we can provide to push for energy access and energy security, but also dealing with the longer-term climate crisis and reducing our impacts on climates and enhancing resilience in local communities? What is your perspective on that?
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. I think, yeah, it's very, very good description that energy is like, wow. Well, from my perspective, energy is like blood. And, you know, for every city, every country, actually, we have different physical condition. So with our healthy, you know, body, the blood should be, you know, essential for every city. And also, if every city have their different conditions, in fact, they have different approaches, different pathways to reach 2050 by their own different pathway. So for instance, in the past few years, actually from ICGI, we work as a partner for ICLEI, and we help different cities in Chinese Taipei. Well, the first example, we're talking about RE100. So actually, there's a 1,000 city in the southern part of Taiwan and called Pingtung, and which is the city who joined the RE100 initiative in ICLEI. And they identify themselves because it's an agricultural county. So there, I think most energy consumption using in building and housing, not for industry. So for them to identify their own condition, but in the southern part of Taiwan, they have a lot of solar. So they're using a lot of solar to generate new power, because in the past, in Taiwan, we have 80% energy from coal and also natural gas. Okay, 80% from fossil fuel. So they generate the solar from their own, and then they already push the RE100 in their housing and building section, reach this year, actually. So it's the first RE100 city for housing and energy section in Taiwan. And also for another case in the northern part of Taiwan, we have a city called Taoyuan. And Taoyuan actually is a very, very special city, because it's the gate of, if you enter in Taiwan, there's an airport, a main airport, international airport called TPE. So actually Taoyuan identified 90% logistics actually come from Taoyuan and then spread to all the other parts of Taiwan. So 2 years ago, Taoyuan to be the first eco-logistic city chair around the world of ICLEI. And then they identify for the eco-logistic, they have transformation from how the house wearing, the warehouse, transportation, the production or any delivery, something like that. Especially in the past 2 years, actually, there's a very, very big challenge during the pandemic. All the people cannot go outside, but using the e-service. So actually, the delivery logistic actually increased a lot. So for Taoyuan, they identify their own conditions, and then they have very, very big roadmap for the eco-logistic. They provide 8 different essential approaches to help the city for transformation. And then and the last, the city cases, I would like to say Kaohsiung, because Kaohsiung actually is also the key partner for ICLEI to connect for Taiwan. They have a capacity building center in Kaohsiung. And Kaohsiung is quite different, because a few years ago, they take the leader for eco-mobility a few years ago and have a demonstration project. However, Kaohsiung identified as an industrial city. They occupy 25% carbon emission in Taiwan. Yeah, so it's a heavy industrial city. However, I think two months ago, they identified their own 2050 net zero pathway to transform from industrial city to more green economy city. So I think in sum up, every city should identify their own condition, and then with this renewable energy, it's like a new blood. So if we can have our own condition and to identify the approaches, I think every city could have his special approaches, and then we can work together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Cam. I think indeed, one of the pieces that is really important is for every territory to understand its local renewable energy potential. So do that mapping, and there are technical experts who can help you do the mapping. But understanding an industrial city has a very different context to an agricultural city, and one can probably move faster in the agricultural cities. And we have the success of Pingtung County, which is fantastic. Celebrate 100% renewable energy. For the cities that are not yet clear, what is a net zero roadmap? That is energy shifting to 100% renewables where you possibly can. And there's fantastic potential on that one. Let's move to Kenya, the context here. Now we're sitting in the multi-level action pavilion. This means talking about different levels of government or tiers of government and how they work together. Now looking at Kenya, which I think is an extremely interesting case when we're looking at multi-level governance. What do you think, Mr. Joseph Oganga? How can local governments still intensify that collaboration with other levels of government? What are your views on that?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, in Kenya, we have a multi-level government. We have local government, which is called regional government, which is called county governments. We also have cities, and we have national government. As we address energy access and other policies related to energy, the two levels of government work together. And how do we work together? We work together by whatever project we are carrying out, we must involve the national government, and they must advise us on how to go about it. For example, we are having a project, the 100% RE project supported by ICLEI. In that project, the project implementation team involve very many parties. Number one party is the national government. So we have membership from the national government. We have membership from the government agencies related to the sector, the energy sector. That is like Kenya Power and Renewable Energy Corporation. And then we have the private sector. So whatever we are doing, for example, as we do projects, it is the government, we involve the government to help us in coming up with monitoring and evaluation strategies, and to make sure that the project becomes a success. Also, most of the policies related to energy, we domesticate them. So we do not come up with new policies, but we domesticate national government policies to regional or county level policies. So we work together in implementation of renewable energy projects, and the national government is our number one advisor. Thank you.
This juggling of technology is a bit challenging. Thank you so much, sir. I think it is important also to understand that, of course, you need to see national policy that gives the clear direction, but we miss this in so many countries. And Rana, I'll come back to you on that one again as well. We must see more ambitious national policies that allow, enable, and support local action. And I think in Kenya, we're seeing an evolution there. I would also like to maybe put forward that the national governments need to listen more to the local governments. This is not a top-down activity. This is different levels of government that actually have different roles to play, but together they can play it better. Maybe it's also, I'm extremely curious to see the outcome of your 100% RE roadmap. And I know you're working very hard on this one. So we're curious to celebrate some successes at the next climate COP as well. Thank you, sir. Great. I think maybe Vaughan, Javier, will move to you. I also would like to talk a bit more about inclusiveness. A just transition is key. We see this not only purely from a climate perspective, but making sure that we have a future, and it's a future for us all, including the youth. So what inspiring messages can you give us from the youth perspective, and make it tough for us, but make it interesting, because we need to understand where we can improve embracing and listening to the youth. But what does that mean in practice?
Yeah, so I would love to talk more about this, and I'll take it on how I'll approach this is I'll talk a bit about the work we do at Student Entry. So for those of you who don't know the organization I work for, we're the world's largest youth-led organization on energy. And our goal is to empower young people with the skills needed to accelerate the energy transition. And we do this through capacity building and through creating a space for you to act. So one of the ways, like some of the programs we offer are really clear examples of how youth are shaping the energy future and how they're having, but I guess bottoms up approaches to this. So some of our programs, it gives university students the opportunity to take our brand into their university, create a club, and do any kind of action they want. And this goes from something as simple as going into schools and educating young people, or going into communities, teaching them about more sustainable technologies they can use. And then that's the easier end of it. Then we can go all the way to one of our other programs that enables young people to go into a community and implement renewable energy. So for example, one of our programs, the youth in there, they're based in Brazil, and they're going into the Peruvian Amazon to implement solar powered Wi-Fi, satellite Wi-Fi for an indigenous community of 50 people. And these are very, very far away from the government. So these are the kind of on the ground action that young people are doing. They're working with the community, and they're influencing not just community change, not just sustainability, but an entire culture change as well. And when you take an approach like this, when you include more youth planning like this, it's not only just more diversity in age group, it's overall more inclusion. When you include more young people, you get to include more gender diversity, overall more inclusivity for so many things. And building this with inclusion as the foundation, you get some really, really strong systems that support the work you want to achieve and the work that they're doing on the ground. And these community-led solutions led by youth, it already exists. These are places that governments can already go into. These are things that governments need to be part of as well. And when they work with youth, it's not only, how do I say, it really accelerates the work we're doing. The young people know where we want to go. We have these solutions, and we want to work with governments. We want to work with the older generations. It's all about intergenerational collaboration. It's not that young people want to replace you. Maybe we want to replace the incompetent leaders who are very much on the end of inaction. But let's not go down there. Sorry. But let's take this back a bit. If we go into, let's say, the Paris Agreement, we have these international demands to meet 1.5 degrees Celsius. My country had Trinidad and Tobago, we had this very ambitious goal of achieving 10% renewable energy by 2021. It's 2022 right now. So consider this, like, instead of just setting a goal like this, work with people who are on the ground at the moment. And that way you get appropriate action. You get people who are already working in the communities, changing culture. These are people on the ground with work you want to do. Just work with them, you know? So that way you get local appropriate action, and you don't need to spend too much resources on young people. From the government perspective, I'd say, just to close up everything, I think that was a mix of both of what youth are doing and how governments can go into that. But just to touch a bit clearer on how governments need to interact with us, it's to understand the value of youth. There are almost 2 billion young people in this world, and we're a major stakeholder. A lot of people need to understand that it's not just the people in power who are going to benefit from, you know, money and stuff. We need to understand that all of this money comes from different parts of the world where there's suffering, where they're exploiting countries, and it's really driving unsustainable practices in like a lot of developing countries, especially. So understanding the value of youth and getting people from these marginalized communities to be represented are especially important, because the people who are most affected by climate change are the people less likely to be involved in climate action and energy especially. So understanding the value of youth and bringing them into the perspective, into the decision making. This could be through youth advisory boards. This can be through, well, this is actually taking it a step further than just considering us a stakeholder. You want youth advisory boards so they can see what work is going on, how you can get them involved in the negotiations, especially about climate, especially about policy. If you want to bring it back to Trinidad and Tobago, there is so many silly developments that are against youth voices right now, especially coming out from universities, what they're doing for final year projects, what they're doing for their masters and stuff. It goes against what the country is developing into, but the government doesn't listen. We need to move away from the top-down approach and start working together for sustainability, especially for climate and especially for energy security. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that perspective. And indeed, ICLEI launched our youth strategy, and that's exactly embedded in our new work for the future. I think it comes down to respect for every single individual, which is maybe also a topic that we can take to the legal conversation a little bit later. I think maybe Rana, with REN21, I know you've been working a lot, pushing very hard for the renewable energy agenda, helping people understand that this is not just a small piece, but it embraces everything. And one can look at this in a very holistic manner. If we're looking at the need for switching to a full, clean, sustainable energy transition globally, I think you guys have done amazing reports, which really help to understand, are we on track or not? And we are not on track. But maybe could you give some perspectives on where could we how can we enable financing to implement action at the local level faster, more efficient? Do you have some thoughts on that?
Thank you very much. How to bring financing? I mean, let's be honest, finance is always the chicken and egg problem. Do we have good projects? Where do we get the finance? Capital is there, but we don't have good projects. So there is a finger pointing. And I think this finger pointing, which we encounter in financing, is a finger pointing which exists throughout the ecosystems. We still discuss energy efficiency separately from renewables, separately from energy access. We still don't acknowledge the fact that energy is a cross-cutting topic that is actually fundamental in all societal activities and economic activities. And I think if we look at energy as a more holistic way and at the value of energy, this is actually where the finance world should really consider the fact that we have an opportunity today to build a sustainable and more inclusive society, but also economy. And for doing this, I think we need obviously to look at the finance part in very different manners, because funding and finance for large scale infrastructure projects is very different than funding and findings for solar home systems or mini grids. The access to finance from the private sector or from national government is different than from a city government, for instance. So I think there is very clearly, similar to what you said, we need to analyze what the situation is of every single city and territory. That's also the case when it comes to finance. I think, especially being here in the African continent, what is very clear is in developing emerging economies, renewable energy cost-wise is still the least cost solution to produce electricity. The problem is, however, that the financial costs are so high that in the end, they cannot compete actually with the fossil fuel. And the reason why they are so high is that the rating basically of the risk in the countries is high, that there is no local currency finance available, and that they're lacking currency mechanism or guarantee mechanism. And I think this is really something which is fundamental. And if it's about deployment, and let's be honest, today it's not about ambition anymore. I mean, let's forget ambition. Let's move to action, because the reality is, and this is the International Energy Agency part, 50% of the CO2 emissions existing can be reduced with existing technologies. And this is energy efficiency, it's energy saving, it's renewable energy, it's digitalization. They are there. It's about deployment. So anybody who speaks about we need more ambition, no, that's not what it's about. We need the right market conditions. We need governments to understand that we need to build up industry, manufacturing, train young people, close the skilling gap, and move to action. And I think this is basically the part, let's be honest, we had big crises historically, and big crises had strong government reactions. And also in the recent years, we have seen this. We have seen governments mobilizing for COVID. We have seen the Green New Deal, which initially was really very ambitious. We have seen the mobilization now around the Ukraine war. And governments are able to do this. And I think if governments would really treat this emergency we have today as an emergency, similar to a war, we wouldn't be sitting around still trying to convince people that we need to move to action, but we would have something like an infrastructure plan that moves in the direction. And with infrastructure plans, you have governments who can also decide to reduce the interest rates. You have the funding coming in, etc. And I think this is basically what we need. So maybe just on the skilling gap as one example, and this is not my idea, but I have promised that I would spread this idea. Why not asking the army to install the solar panels and heat pumps today, because we do not have the job, basically skilled people to do so. Why not using electric utilities and grid operators who exist at the national level, at the local level, who are often still publicly owned, to develop basically grids so that we can better integrate renewable energy. And I think this is, for me, the question is, how do we basically put the urgency on the table, but on the other hand, also the opportunities it represents for everybody.
Thank you very much for that, Rana. A nice holistic picture that you gave us there. I think it is interesting when we talk to the finance sector, we're looking for blended finance. The public sector money is not enough to do its seed money, if you will. So we need to make sure that the private sector finds this an interesting space. And frankly, it is an interesting space with very interesting economics coming out of there. And the cost of renewable energy still really going down and making this the best choice in all possible cases. I like the statement, it's about deployment. I really like that. I think that's a quote I'll bring into my future statements as well. Now, we've heard from different people, and I would like to maybe come now to our colleague from, again, also from Latin America, and maybe framing it a little bit from a legal perspective. This climate COP is about a legal negotiation. And I think people maybe misunderstand what we're trying to do here as well. What we are trying to do is show it can be done, it is being done, but we need to scale up. If we look at the trade-offs between fast-tracking renewable energy, protecting nature, how do we do this in an efficient way, understanding some trade-offs might be needed, but how to not make bad compromises? Could you share a little bit of your vision on this, Alexandre?
Sure. Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. And first of all, I have to say that you cannot eat each other for decades unless you met as a child, right? But first of all, I have to say that in Brazil, we have more than 80% of renewable energy. And to implement infrastructure projects all over the road, not in Brazil, not only in Brazil, it's hard, especially for environmental issues. So I can say, and I'd like to address some energies like solar energy projects and wind projects, that we have some issues that I think we could try to move on. First of all, I believe we need investments for sure, and to have investments, we need a stabilized legal and political view. So we need to have a safe area in order that we could say to the investors that is a good place to invest in. So that's the first thing. And I think we should, we have put some energy in this process in order to settle legal background, legal foundation safe for investors. And why I say that, because sometimes frequently we have some initiative to change the status quo in order to so it's not a safe zone for the investor. That's the first thing. The second thing, I believe sometimes the investors want to implement the projects in the best area for economic perspective. But of course, we have to balance the economic perspective and environmental one. For example, for us, wind power energy, usually in top of the dunes is the best place to implement the tower. However, the vegetation in this area is protected. So sometimes you have to go a little further. It's not the best in economic response, but you can compatibilize environmental issues and economic ones. For the solar projects, we have some initiatives, including in Brazil, from Unicamp, is University of Campinas in São Paulo. They're trying to provide different uses for the area for where you implement the solar plates. So, and instead of only for solar energy production, also to produce energy for agriculture. So, because using the land is a huge problem, not only in Brazil, but different uses for the same area. And for solar plant, we need huge areas or very big areas to develop the solar plant energy. So how to use these areas for different uses could be a way. And another point that I think is a very important point is we need in Brazil a national plan in order to define which areas we're supposed to protect and which areas supposed to develop. Why is that? Because now, as soon as we don't have it, all the time that a new project want to get an environmental license, it's really hard and sometimes spend 10, 12 years because discussing if it's a protected area or is an area for a development project. So as soon as we have, of course, it's too hard to get that. As soon because we have different bodies of governments in Brazil, but as soon as we have a national plan in order to settle areas for different proposals, I believe this could be a goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexandre. I think this legal space, we've learned a lot. And I think there are so many good practices that we can also share on what is legally a good practice or a best practice that others can look at as well. If we're looking at the Amazon, we need the rainforest to also as the lungs of the earth. And then in the urban areas, we have so much other potential to generate renewables in an urban area or a peri-urban area or an area right next in the agricultural context. Again, the city context. Even in industrial cities, you have other potential and opportunities which people are not even thinking of. So maybe a recap before I go to our next round of questions. We need to raise awareness still. This seems to be an area that we are talking to the converted. So let's broaden our message to others. Let's do that together. We certainly also need to share more what works well and what does not work well. We have no time, so we need to scale up fast. Now, today we are facing a war situation which has stimulated also an energy crisis in the sense that for those of us who worked in the space of energy, we knew something like this was coming and we could have been prepared. but apparently nobody was prepared. So let's look again at the role of national governments versus the role of local governments. Maybe, and this is a question to any one of you, and maybe take your own country context. Where do you see one or two things that tomorrow your national government should be doing to enable local action? And what are two things your local governments can do quickly and easily? Is there anybody who would like to take that one?
So I would say the first thing to do is give local governments a seat around the table. And let's be honest, I mean, I was really shocked about the fact cities are consuming 75% of the energy. They're responsible for 80% of CO2 emissions. They correspond to, I think, 80 or 90% of GDP. So they are a massive actionable entry point. And still, in response to the energy crisis, to the global energy crisis, to the geopolitical one, we have not heard city voices so much, and we have not heard national governments reaching out to cities and as a strategic partner. So I think for me, that's the first thing. The other one very clearly is to acknowledge the fact that we need top down and bottom up. We are not going to make the transition happen without having the societal support. And cities are key here. And cities are also key to bring basically industry and the private sector on board. And I think this is something which is important. And building on this, I guess like one entry point is really to make sure that with cities and through cities, we can also build community energy projects, city projects, and use the infrastructure which is there in a way that it creates the support of society. And that's something which is actually quite easy to do. It requires permitting, it requires zoning, it requires making the rooftops of schools, public buildings, etc., available for investment and so on. So I think there are many, many measures, and I'm not a city person, so I'm not going to speak about what you know better. What can cities do? I mean, let's be honest, being responsible for 80% of the CO2 emissions, I'm living in Paris, okay? I am just shocked how much the lighting is still on. That, for instance, advertisements that is with screens, with movement, etc., is still an obligation, or not an obligation. They are actually legal binding contracts that make it an obligation to continue having them on, even though we are facing an energy crisis. So I think there are possibilities to cut down on energy. And the reality is cities are now starting to do it because the energy prices, the electricity cost actually in the city budgets is so huge, and the fluctuating and increased fossil fuel prices are a massive challenge for cities and for households and for citizens and for companies, that they start moving into that direction. But actually they move into that direction because of the economic pressure and not because of the climate pressure. So I think this already shows it's possible to do things. What can cities do a part of this? And I think this is where, for me, and now I'll speak like coming from rent in one side, the reality is energy is not electricity only. We only consume 20% of the energy we consume is power. 80% is energy we use for heating, cooling, and transport. And I will now speak as a chair of SLOCAT, which is basically like the equivalent of Rent in One, but for sustainable transportation. The reality is cities and urban areas have a massive opportunity, which is building up public transportation. The share of renewable energy in transport is of 4%. So I think that's clearly something cities should be doing.
Nice question. And then the first thing I already said, that I think this national plan should be something that we should address, but unfortunately we won't be able to do this in a quick way. But there are other things that I really believe that we should move on. And first of all, I think we need a federal law regarding environmental permits, because in Brazil, we don't have a federal law. We have a lot of regulations. Everybody knows that we're supposed to go to get an environmental permit. But as soon as we don't have a law, it's not strong as a law is. So that's, and we are discussing this law for 19 years in the Congress. So I believe we're supposed to approve this law. That's the first thing. The second one, I believe we should have a law to talk about environmental permits for renewable energy. So we cannot address all the things as they are the same. They are not the same. If you want to improve renewable energy, we're supposed to have different views and different approaches in order to get this approved done, of course, in a safe way regarding the environmental issues, but in a faster way. That's what I believe.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just follow the two speakers, colleagues here, that for cities, actually, yes, cities can do a lot. Actually, well, in the past few years, we work, with some national governments, but also city leaders. And I think a lot of city leaders, they have ambitions and they need guidance. So law is quite important, and they need some national target for them to achieve. But in addition to that, actually, a tool, a platform to know what kind of maybe action they can do, and also how to set up the pathway is quite important. So actually, well, since 2019, ICDI worked with ICLEI together. We launched the Global Smart Solution Report, and to use smart city approaches in the cities to achieve sustainable city, and also help the cities for this digital transition, how to use this approach to help to for the sustainable governance goal together. So in addition to that, actually this year, we're going to launch the new local energy governance rating system together. That's a very big guidance for all the cities together, with different 6 dimensions. In addition to that, maybe we have like policy, infrastructure, transparency, international cooperation, or different index. And with that together, we can help all the city members around the world, including like 1,700 members from ICLEI and also the other cities. They can take this, as a guidance to help them with this kind of different steps, like they have 3 stars, 4 stars, 5 stars. How can then, step by step to achieve 100% renewable energy by themselves? So all the cities, actually, they have different conditions, as I mentioned. They are not compared to the others. They are compared to their own self. So in addition to that, they're using this kind of guidance, policy framework. They can, getting better and better by themselves every year. I think that's very, very, encouraging. And also, I hope all the cities, we can, work together. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. What must we do now? And I want to give the Kenyan perspective. In Kenya, the transport sector is the #1 employer of most of our youth, and that is like many other cities in the world. But again, ironically, the transport sector is the #1 greenhouse gas emitter. So how do you balance the two? We cannot transition to 100% renewable energy if we don't address the issues in the transport sector. We must make transport sector a policy priority. And what are we doing in Kenya? And here I want to laud CESA, Sustainable Energy Solution for Africa, ICLEI, for supporting us. They have come up with a living lab in Kisumu, which is doing what we call, which is supporting e-mobility. And because the transport sector where we use the two-wheel motorcycle, the three-wheel motorcycle are the #1 employer, we are encouraging the youth to use the electronic mobility to reduce the greenhouse gas emission in the city and in the whole of the county. So the #1 priority is for us to address the 100% renewable energy transition. We must move from the fossil fuel used in the transport sector to e-mobility. So we must allow electricity to support our transport sector. And that is as a policy priority, and we must change so that we can move towards 100% renewable energy. Thank you.
Hello again. I will say this is a very tricky question for me to answer. And I say that coming from my country right now. I did mention before our ambitious goal, but I forgot to mention that renewable energy is still illegal in my country. And moving forward, why I think it's difficult to answer this question is right now, like as we're speaking there in the Caribbean, there's terrible flooding, like places where there's never been flooding. All week, it's been terrible. People are losing their businesses. People are losing their homes. People are losing their lives over the impacts of climate change. And what a lot of people around the globe are not taught or just forget at sometimes is that climate change at this point, it's because of the fossil fuel industry. And when it comes to my country, like each year it gets climate impacts at waste and waste. So when you look at pre-feasibility for clean energy, renewable energy, it just gets much more unsafe and much more unreliable with the little amount of space we have. Because my country, the two islands, it's big enough to be a small city in one of the bigger countries around the world. So when you look at a perspective like this, what really is there for a small country like us to do when our top-down government fails year after year to do things to prevent this? We're a fossil fuel economy and all they care about is getting money for their own selves, not even for the country, not even for the citizens to a great extent. So I just wanted to share this perspective here. I'm not too sure what I can recommend for cities, but this is the situation in my country. Not too sure what we can do though, but thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to build on what you said because I forgot obviously one big measure which we need to take. And this means like phasing out fossil fuel subsidies. We still spend, and I think for me, these numbers are crazy and it's 2020 numbers and they do not take into account the increasing subsidies of governments to fossil fuel because of the crisis. If you look at the most ambitious scenarios, that's a Bloomberg New Energy Finance scenario, we need per year $1.9 trillion to reach basically the renewable energy capacities which we need so that we are reaching the Paris Agreement. At the same time, and this is 2020 numbers, as I said, we are spending $5.9 trillion on fossil fuel subsidies in over 115 countries. So I think like a concrete measure here is asking for phasing out fossil fuel. Now this of the fossil fuel subsidies. This obviously raises a real question about what is a just transition? How can this be inclusive? And I'm not saying that it's easy, but let's be really honest. It's not only about the just transition, it is about building a just and fair energy system. And the reality is the fossil fuel system is not just and fair. It's very exclusive. In the moment where lots of governments, cities, citizens are facing, companies are facing major economic challenges and bankruptcy, there are few governments and few companies that are making amazing amounts of money. And they are, as you said, not feeding it in again into the society. So I just think let's not only look for a just transition, but also for building a just and fair energy system.
Thank you very much for that, Rana. Admittedly, I'm getting depressed now. We've talked about a lot of problems. Maybe let's invert the conversation to make it a bit more optimistic, understanding that the challenges we need to deal with are enormous. I don't know if there are any questions coming in from our online colleagues. Nope. Okay. So they are fascinated by what we're saying already, which is fantastic. Are there any questions from the floor? Would anybody like to pose an optimistic reply question, please? Feel free. So if you have, wave your hand and we can bring you a microphone. Then I'll continue with my colleagues here. I wanted to come again to the youth angle, because this is something for me that the youth was not on my radar for a very long time, and I apologize for that. But it is now firmly on my radar. And we are thinking as ICLEI, how do we work with youth groups like your own, Student Energy, but also many others. And of course, what I'm looking for is the passion, the anger, the motivation, but also the inspiration that we can get from the young people, because that's the creativity that we're looking for. Do you feel in Student Energy, you seem to have a very clear direction of where you're going to? How can you work with ICLEI? Can you give us some thoughts on what would you like to do with us to move the space in a better direction?
I would say that for young people, it's very hard to work in this space. Like, it's very easy to lose momentum in the climate space, to lose confidence. But the work I do every day with Student Energy, we work with a network of more than 50,000 young people in more than 130 countries. And seeing the work that these young people that we meet with every month, seeing what they do on the ground, it's really what is so inspirational and what keeps me going in this fight against climate change. Because there's so much to talk about what young people can do with governments, with multi-level governments as well, multi-level action. There are so many people who, let's see, I'm trying to think of an example, but so in Mexico, for example, in Yucatan, we have one of our chapters there based, I'm not gonna butcher their name, I don't know it in English, but it's in one of the national universities there. And their leadership team, they work with the government on so many things. They've been invited to conferences, and right now they're on a youth advisory board for the government, not only for clean energy, but for a recovery plan for COVID. These are kids between the ages of 18 and 23 working with governments on these things. There are other people around the world who influence policy in our network. Anything that governments are doing, they need to involve youth. And also all of the projects that youth are doing on the ground, governments need to be involved. Governments need to support their work into the community, to support their work like generally on as many levels as possible, on a national level, on the local level. There's so much room and so much opportunity for collaboration between young people and people in power. So it's just to get the conversation started and see what's the right appropriate action for wherever that conversation is headed. There's no one size fits all. So everything must start with a discussion to see what's feasible and what can be done together.
Thank you very much for those words. I think, yes, we have a question here up front, sir. There we go. Please introduce yourself and your question.
Thank you so much. I think this can be handled by one of the panelists, but I just wanted to pick on the topic of transition to 100% renewable energy and look at the involvement of the women folk and the youth groups. Because we find, for example, in Kenya, Kisumu, where I come from, is that we have women groups who are involved in briquettes. They make briquettes from organic waste after composting them. And we find that there's lack of market, and they drive to encourage them and sensitize them and also support them in that. If at all, are we pushing regional governments to support these groups by looking for the markets for them? Number two, energy is a monopoly of the national government. Are we pushing the national government to accept and give monopoly, to give autonomy, sorry, to the regional governments, so that if at all they can be able to get solutions to energy access, then that is acceptable, as opposed to really putting a lot of roadblocks. Because we find out that as much as we are talking about solid waste management, and we have scenarios where we have establishment innovations that can be able to turn that solid waste management into energy, there's a lot of bureaucracy in the usage of that energy, like, for example, street lighting, provision into the community. You must get approvals and licenses from the national government, and it is very, very tedious. You will end up dropping the ball. 3, innovations of using, for example, Kisumu. We have water hyacinth in Lake Victoria, and we have innovators who have come up to use the same to turn that into biogas. For example, Biogas International. What are we doing to encourage, support the organizations so that we can be able to liquefy the produced gas for portability purposes to other areas or for investment purposes? Thank you.
Thank you for those excellent examples. I think definitely what I'm hearing is there's a need for all of us to speak much more intensively to national governments collectively. Certainly policies at national level need to stop blocking action. The fact that we have a country that doesn't allow renewable energy is inexcusable in this modern day and age. You need to look at efficiency. The just transition requires us to be more humane. We need to respect human life, and we need to respect nature, and we need to harness this wonderful series and sources of renewable energy, which is pretty much for free out there. And we are not being clever enough. I think we are needing clever people, committed people who also would be brave enough to raise these issues that we've mentioned today to national government. National policy may not block local action. It needs to enable, support, proactively push for upscaling to 100% renewables, less bureaucracy. Also in the financing space, we need to see less bureaucracy. There needs to be control, but it needs to be efficient control systems. We heard today monitoring and evaluation systems need to be in place to monitor, are you on track? Are we moving in the right direction? The action plans, I love this fact of getting national action plans that need to also align, and our local action plans that are the implementation plans, where you can then define how much money is needed, how much investment, what capacities and skills are needed for people to move forward. We do not have enough human power at the moment to roll out 100% renewables. We need to upscale dramatically, and the youth need jobs. So there's a win-win in so many of what we've discussed and heard today. Opening the floor once more to questions. Are we out of time? Okay, we got a question online from Caroline in Brazil. To be very direct, what are your country's action plans for the socialization of renewable energy for poor citizens? Okay, I'm not sure which country we're addressing, but let's just take that as an open question to all countries. The socialization of renewable energy for poor citizens. We're talking about energy poverty. We're talking about no access to energy. Does anybody would like to respond to that? Are there national policies in place that support this particular question? Thanks.
Well, in Brazil, we have a national energy program to provide energy for everyone. And you can imagine in Brazil, as huge as we are, when several different access to several levels in Brazil. So you mentioned Amazon, and so it's really hard to provide energy because sometimes they need to cut trees, for example. And so how to balance this is a huge problem, but we have a national program for every energy companies that in Portuguese is energy for all. That's the program. So supposed to go to every corner of the country, but unfortunately we don't have energy for all so far. So we are in 2022 and we don't have energy for all. So that's a problem that we should address.
Thank you very much. I think, well, just very quick response to this question. I think for all of us, the main consensus is to mainstream the renewable energy and also climate action to all. However, they need, you know, SDG Pavilion, SDG 17 partnership, and also capacity building program. I take one example. While we have a program called community-based adaptation program to help different communities and with different vulnerable people for climate action, and also for them to have bottom up the adaptation policy from them. And the one case is in Taipei City. It's a, you know, like international city, but also even in international cities, we also have some communities with very vulnerable people and low salary poor people there. So we talked to social workers and how can we help them. And in the very beginning, the social workers they don't understand. They say, okay, climate change is important, but how do they do? You know, because they are social workers that help the vulnerable people to help them for the salary. But after we have some training programs, capacity building programs, they understand what the people they help now is actually they have different, you know, like energy poor or different issues. They never think about that. So after they have their training program, we help them to identify this energy pool together, and then they understand for the people they're helping, actually they put more you know, life salary fee in energy part because they're using second-hand equipment and they don't, you know, take care about the energy fee, something like that. So then you know, after that they identify this vulnerability, and then they have new like equipment and also renewable energy for them housing or something like that. That's very, very good. You know, after that, the social workers take care of this issue, and then they can continue to help the local community. I think for capacity building program to all different partners, to let them understand what's important for renewable energy, and then they can do by themselves. That's the key issue. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. The way I get the question is how to address the just transition of energy. And I want to give the perspective of Kisumu County. In Kisumu County, we use the approach which I will call the bottom up. We go down more particularly to the rural community, those who are not accessible those who are not connected to the national grid. We also move to the urban poor, those who are suffering from energy poverty, the one living in the slums. And what do we do? To those in the rural community, we connect them as a government. We partner with the national government and we connect them to the national grid. And that one is done purely by the government, free of charge. We don't charge them because we are dealing with the vulnerable household, vulnerable community. In the slums, where majority of us staying in the slums suffer from what we call energy poverty, we encourage them to uptake the renewable energy. And that is where my colleague was talking about improved cookstoves, briquettes, and we bring the women together. They make these briquettes and improved cookstoves among themselves and sell to among themselves. So apart from addressing the energy issue, it is also a business venture for them, a business model for them. I also want to say that the government, the county government of Kisumu, what do we do to our poor? We supply them free of charge with solar lamps. And this solar lamp is very important to them. One, to the vulnerable household, the solar lamp is used to light the homes. And this is very critical, particularly for the school-going children. As they do their night studies, they use this solar lamp instead of using the traditional tin lamp. There is a tin lamp which is used, and it is very smoky. It uses paraffin. So we have a project in Kisumu County called Operation That Tin Lamp Out, Operation Nyangile Out. So we kick it out and replace it with solar. So our people can have a lit home, our children can do studies. What about our poor women in the village doing small businesses in the SME sector? They use this solar lamp to light their business, and through that, it promotes the adaptation of 24-hour economy. At least in some way, they can do business up to late hours using solar lamp, particularly in the markets which are not connected to the national grid. So I think those are the policies we have in place, the plans we have in place to support the people starting at the lower level, going up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's exciting to see the diversity of things we've addressed today. And I want to thank each and every one of you for your passion and your commitment. And let's look towards creating a space where we also support each other, because our own energy also gets low sometimes. We need to make sure that we can boost each other, because this is not an easy space. We thought it was easy, but clearly it is not. I would love to see multi-generational teams, multidisciplinary teams coming together at the local level and redesigning the world. Imagine you're looking down on the planet Earth. Pretty soon, by 2050, I believe we'll be 90 billion people on this planet. That cannot be sustained. Why don't we stop talking about all of these issues which are the global crises and start thinking about people and respect for human life? Design a city that you wish to live in. The healthy city. There is no air pollution, where you have free access to public transport and you have no energy poverty. Let's design this from the bottom up, and we might find solutions to be overcoming all these obstacles, the legal obstacles, the policy obstacles. If we can show what a life and quality of life and energy for all, sustainable energy for all should look like, maybe we can convince our national government partners to stop blocking and to make sure that the policies are enabling and supporting. Together, I think we can do this. And I look forward to working with all of you and all of you. So thank you very much, and wishing you a lovely rest of the day and a successful COP.
Thank you.